The world just woke up to a diplomatic earthquake. UK, Canada, and Australia have formally recognized the state of Palestine. Yes, you heard that right. For decades, international leaders have tiptoed around this issue. But suddenly, in one bold move, 3 major nations have thrown down a marker that could shake the foundations of Middle East politics. And the question on everyone's lips, is this a genuine step toward peace, or a political gamble with consequences no one can fully predict? The announcement from the UK comes after months of tense deliberation, private warnings, and whispered diplomacy behind closed doors. Sir Keir Starmer, often seen as cautious, has taken a decisive step, and not a moment too soon, his advisors insist. The UK government has repeatedly maintained that a two-state solution is the only viable path to lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians. But as images from Gaza and the West Bank flood the news, showing devastation and despair, it became increasingly clear that waiting any longer might mean losing the two-state option forever. While critics argue that recognizing Palestine without borders, a stable government, or full international legitimacy is premature, ministers in London counter that moral and political urgency can no longer be ignored. The situation on the ground demands action, they say, not endless debate. Canada and Australia didn't hesitate either. Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada declared that the current Israeli government has systematically undermined the prospects for a Palestinian state. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, alongside Foreign Minister Penny Wong, echoed that sentiment, stressing that their recognition is part of a broader, coordinated effort to reinvigorate a two-state solution, while demanding immediate humanitarian relief and the release of hostages. These moves aren't happening in isolation. They are strategically timed, synchronized with allies to maximize political impact and signal a growing frustration with Israel's conduct in Gaza and the West Bank. But here's where it gets complicated. The Israeli government, predictably, has responded with fury. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the recognition an absurd reward for terrorism, insisting that nations taking this step are choosing politics over reality. Israel's rhetoric paints this as a reckless gesture that endangers its citizens and ignores the ongoing threat from Hamas. And yet, back in the UK, ministers argue that ignoring the ground realities has become impossible. They claim that diplomacy without action is meaningless when civilians are being caught in the crossfire of decades-long conflict. Meanwhile, some observers suggest that domestic politics may have nudged Starmer's hand. Labour has faced criticism from the left for perceived inaction on Gaza, with figures like Jeremy Corbyn and the Green Party voicing outrage. Could it be that internal pressures finally aligned with international strategy, pushing the UK to act now? Or is this a masterstroke of global coordination aimed purely at sending a signal to Israel and the world? Either way, the consequences are already rippling outward. The United States, predictably, has positioned itself in opposition, with voices from the Republican side labeling the move premature and strategically flawed. The stark contrast between the coordinated G7 recognition and Washington's resistance underscores the complex web of alliances, rivalries, and moral arguments that now define this crisis. On the ground, reactions are equally mixed. Palestinians are cautiously optimistic, recognizing the symbolic significance of international validation, but many warn that recognition alone will not end the decades of occupation, settlement expansion, and systemic inequality. Critics point out that while recognition is a gesture, the real test lies in enforcing consequences and demanding concrete reforms from all parties involved. Will the recognition translate into tangible change, or is it destined to be another headline in a long history of unfulfilled promises? And as global attention intensifies, the world is left watching. How will Israel respond? Will it double down on its policies, or will the weight of international pressure force a historic pivot? As this story unfolds, it is impossible to ignore the symbolism at play. UK, Canada, and Australia are not just recognizing a state. They are sending a signal that international patience has limits, that human rights cannot be endlessly sidelined, and that political courage, however delayed, can still make waves. Yet, with every congratulatory message, there are murmurs of doubt, questions about timing, and whispers about hidden agendas. Is this truly about justice and peace, or is it another chapter in the high-stakes game of global politics where symbolism sometimes outweighs substance? And the burning question now, if the world's strongest nations can recognize Palestine today, what happens when pressure finally forces even the most reluctant countries to follow suit? or resist. As the dust begins to settle on this unprecedented diplomatic move, the global chessboard is rapidly rearranging itself. Allies and critics alike are watching, calculating, and questioning what this sudden recognition of Palestine truly signals. In capitals from London to Canberra to Ottawa, officials are framing this as a moral imperative, a stand against decades of stalled negotiations and ongoing humanitarian crises. Yet, the timing is undeniably charged. While some hail it as overdue justice for Palestinians, others argue it is a calculated political maneuver aimed at asserting influence before the United Nations General Assembly convenes. Governments are acutely aware that such a coordinated announcement does more than recognize a state. It sends shockwaves through diplomatic channels, challenges existing alliances, and tests the patience of Israel's most powerful defenders. Israel, predictably, has escalated its rhetoric, portraying this recognition as a reckless undermining of security and a reward to groups it deems terrorist organizations. Netanyahu's warnings, echoed by senior officials, paint a dire picture. They argue that these international gestures could embolden Hamas and other factions, destabilizing an already volatile region. But amid the bluster, there is a stark realization: these criticisms alone cannot reverse the tide of coordinated action. The recognition by the UK, Canada, and Australia is not merely symbolic. It's a signal that frustration with Israel's policies in Gaza and the West Bank is crystallizing into tangible political steps. And with global media amplifying every reaction, every declaration, the world is watching how Israel will recalibrate its strategies, not just militarily, but diplomatically and politically. Inside the UK, the story takes on another layer of intrigue. While Starmer and his ministers publicly assert that this move is driven purely by humanitarian concerns and long-term peace objectives, political analysts suggest that domestic considerations played a role. Labour has faced mounting pressure from left-leaning factions and activist groups demanding a decisive stance on Gaza. The narrative is clear: act now or risk alienating a core segment of voters, while also asserting Britain's moral leadership on the international stage. Meanwhile, other European nations are quietly monitoring the impact, evaluating whether aligning with this bold stance could enhance their own diplomatic leverage or expose them to political blowback. France, long considered a potential ally in such initiatives, appears poised to follow suit, signaling that a broader European shift may be on the horizon. On the ground in Palestine, the recognition is met with cautious optimism. Citizens and activists acknowledge the symbolic weight of these declarations, yet many voice skepticism about immediate, practical outcomes. The question they ask, and the world must grapple with, is whether diplomatic acknowledgement without enforceable mechanisms for change is enough. Can recognition alone alleviate decades of displacement, settlement expansion, and systemic inequality? Or is it merely a headline that momentarily reassures the international community while the reality on the ground remains grim? The international community has set expectations for reforms, humanitarian aid, and governance commitments from the Palestinian Authority. But whether these promises translate into meaningful change is far from guaranteed. And while Palestinians weigh their cautious hope against decades of unfulfilled pledges, the reactions from other corners of the world add layers of complexity. The United States remains a conspicuous holdout, signaling disapproval and skepticism. Critics within Washington argue that such moves risk inflaming tensions and undermining established channels of negotiation. Meanwhile, voices from global human rights organizations caution that recognition without immediate action against humanitarian abuses could be hollow, a symbolic gesture without teeth. The diplomatic tightrope grows ever narrower, with every declaration, tweet, and statement intensifying the stakes. And as governments brace for the fallout, one pressing question looms over every decision maker. How long can symbolism satisfy the world's moral conscience before real action becomes unavoidable? The ripple effects of this unprecedented recognition are already being felt across the Middle East, and nowhere is the tension more palpable than within Israel itself. Netanyahu and his inner circle have publicly condemned the moves by the UK, Canada, and Australia, framing them as a direct affront to Israel's security and sovereignty. Yet beneath the official statements lies a quieter, more pressing concern: the realization that global opinion may finally be shifting. Allies who once remained silent or merely expressed cautious support are now openly challenging Israel's policies. Settlements, checkpoints, and military operations in Gaza and the West Bank are being scrutinized like never before. In diplomatic circles, there is a growing sense that the coordinated recognition represents more than moral posturing. It signals a potential turning point where the international community may begin to act with real consequences, not just words. Meanwhile, across Europe and North America, political pundits are dissecting every angle. Some see Starmer's decision as a carefully orchestrated gambit, a strategic alignment with progressive allies designed to reinforce Britain's moral authority on the global stage. Others argue that it is, at least partially, a domestic play, aimed at shoring up Labour's credibility with its left-leaning base after months of criticism over perceived inaction on Gaza. France, Germany, and other European powers are watching closely, weighing the potential benefits of joining this historic moment against the inevitable diplomatic backlash. Will they act in solidarity, or will caution prevail, leaving the UK, Canada, and Australia to shoulder the boldest step toward Palestinian recognition? The suspense is heightened by the delicate timing. The UN General Assembly is looming, and any unilateral or coordinated declarations could dramatically influence votes, resolutions, and global perception. On the Palestinian side, the reaction is an intricate blend of hope and frustration. Citizens in Gaza and the West Bank recognize the symbolic importance of recognition, but remain acutely aware that their daily struggles, military raids, displacement, economic hardship, will not vanish overnight. Leaders from the Palestinian Authority praise the international gesture, emphasizing that it validates the people's long-standing aspirations for statehood. However, critics warn that recognition, without tangible enforcement, aid, and sanctions against ongoing abuses, risks being largely symbolic, a political headline rather than a transformative step. Social media in the region is buzzing, not just with celebration, but with questions. How long before the promises of reform and humanitarian assistance translate into measurable improvements? And will these declarations provoke retaliation, tighten military restrictions, or intensify diplomatic tensions with Israel? Even as global leaders weigh their next moves, the situation underscores a stark reality. Decades of inaction, broken treaties, and postponed negotiations cannot be undone by words alone. Recognition may open doors, but it also shines a spotlight on the urgent need for concrete measures, accountability, and enforcement. If the UK, Canada, and Australia are truly committed to a two-state solution, the world will expect follow-up action, sanctions, humanitarian aid, and international pressure applied consistently. And yet, as diplomats debate strategies in hushed corridors, a pressing question emerges. Can recognition alone tip the balance toward peace? Or will it simply trigger new layers of conflict, protest, and international debate? In a region where history and grievances run deep, even the boldest political moves carry unpredictable consequences. And just when it seems the situation could not grow more complex, new reports are emerging, suggesting that some countries are quietly reconsidering their stance. Could this wave of recognition inspire a domino effect, forcing even hesitant nations to take sides? Or will opposition, led by powerful holdouts, create a diplomatic stalemate that leaves the boldest actors isolated? The next chapter is poised to reveal whether this historic gesture ignites progress or fuels yet another cycle of tension and uncertainty. As the dust settles from this historic wave of recognition, the global stage is bracing for reactions that could reshape diplomacy in the Middle East. The UK, Canada, and Australia have sent a clear signal. The patience of the international community is fraying, and symbolic acknowledgement of Palestinian statehood is no longer negotiable. Yet symbolism alone cannot rewrite decades of entrenched conflict, and the real question looms larger than ever. Will this diplomatic earthquake translate into meaningful change? Or is it destined to be another headline swallowed by the complexities of war, occupation, and political inertia? The international community is now at a crossroads, where moral authority, strategic interests, and domestic politics collide in ways that will define the coming years. Inside Israel, the tension is palpable. Government officials continue to denounce the move as a dangerous reward for terrorism, while security analysts warn that escalating rhetoric could signal shifts in military and settlement policies. Netanyahu's public condemnation is matched by quieter, behind-the-scenes strategies to rally diplomatic support from allies unwilling to follow Britain, Canada, and Australia. Yet even as Israel asserts its defiance, there is an unmistakable recognition among policymakers that global opinion is slowly consolidating around the urgency of Palestinian rights. The acknowledgement of Palestinian statehood, even by just a few nations, threatens to isolate Israel on critical moral and political fronts, challenging long-held narratives and putting pressure on long-standing allies to reassess their positions. For Palestinians, the recognition is both empowering and frustrating. Citizens and activists welcome the validation, yet there is widespread skepticism about whether tangible change will follow. The challenges are immense. Decades of displacement, settlement expansion, military restrictions, and humanitarian crises cannot be resolved by words alone. Palestinian leaders insist that international recognition is a step toward justice, but they also demand that it be accompanied by enforceable measures, sanctions against violations, increased aid, and concrete reforms. Social media and local discourse reflect this tension, capturing a mixture of cautious optimism and wariness. Will these gestures ultimately empower ordinary Palestinians, or will they be overshadowed by continued inaction, political maneuvering, and the harsh realities on the ground? Meanwhile, the rest of the world watches in anticipation. Countries that have remained neutral or hesitant are now confronted with a choice: align with the momentum or risk diplomatic isolation. The United States, long considered a pivotal player, remains a complex variable. While some leaders express concern over the timing and strategic implications, the global ripple effect of this coordinated recognition cannot be ignored. Activists, analysts, and politicians alike are debating whether these moves will force real progress or merely set the stage for more conflict. And the shadow of domestic politics looms large. Leaders must balance international expectations with internal pressures, all while navigating a landscape where every statement, tweet, or gesture is dissected for hidden agendas. As this story continues to unfold, one thing is clear: the recognition of Palestine by the UK, Canada, and Australia is not the end of the saga. It is the opening salvo in a renewed struggle for justice, sovereignty, and peace. The world has been handed a stark reminder that symbolism, while powerful, must be backed by action, or risk becoming another fleeting headline in a century-long narrative of unresolved conflict. And now, the ultimate question hangs over every decision-maker, every diplomat, and every citizen watching this drama unfold. Will this historic recognition finally tilt the scales toward peace, or will it ignite a cascade of unintended consequences that could change the Middle East forever?